amigos y bienvenidos a clase número 23 y hoy vamos a practicar el pasado, el presente y el futuro. So, we have already covered the present tense with some irregulars, the preterite, the simple past, and also the immediate future. So in this lesson, it's really important that you have done those lessons before, or you have a working knowledge of those tenses, because we're pretty much going to get straight into things. So first of all, have a look here. 3 tenses, but which is the present tense out of vivo, viví, and voy a vivir? So the present tense is vivo, meaning I live, and we can recognize this because of the end of the verb, which ends in an O, referring to the pronoun I. What would you suggest is I am going to live? So our immediate future, voy a vivir, 3 parts. I'm going to live. Okay, you could change that infinitive verb for any verb. For example, voy a hablar, I'm going to talk. Voy a comer, I'm going to eat. And therefore the last one, viví, is our past tense, the preterite, meaning I lived. Take away the IR of the verb, vivir, and add the I with an accent. So it's recognizable because of that accent. Vale, and the second one, how would I go about saying I continue? Continuo, present tense, recognizable because of the O at the end, refers to the pronoun I. What about I continued? Past tense, the preterite, continué. Notice it ends in an accent, very much like verbs that end in an IR. Viví, I lived. Continué, I continued. Continuar is the verb, ends in an AR. Okay, so AR verbs go to E with an accent. IR verbs and ER verbs go to an I with an accent. And of course, that would mean that voy a continuar would be our immediate future. I'm going to continue. A last one. So could you recognize for me, highlight the past tense? That would be aprendí, and it's recognizable because of that I with the accent. Comes from the verb aprender, to learn. Aprendí, I learned. What about I am going to learn? Voy a aprender, 3 parts. I'm going to learn. And finally, I learn is obviously going to be aprendo, recognizable because of the ending O. Venga, vamos a practicar un poquito. So, to recognize a tense, the biggest clue really is in the ending of the verb, as we've just seen. So if it ends in an O, we know that it's present tense and the pronoun is I. We established that sometimes verbs end in the letter I or E with an accent over the top, which would tell us it's past tense, and so on. There are other clues, and some of them are easier actually. Signposts such as today, at the moment, now, and so on, that would indicate we're talking about the present tense. Likewise, yesterday, last week, last year, that would indicate the past tense. So the first job is to identify those signposts. So, task 1 today, empareja las palabras. So match up, pair up the words. I'll come back to you shortly. Y las respuestas en 1, 2 y 3. Venga. Okay, I'm going to read through them with you just to make sure we got the correct pronunciation as well. So we're starting off with number 1, número 1. Hoy, today, don't pronounce the H. 2, de momento, at the moment. 3, ahora, now. Again, don't pronounce the H. Ahora. 4, number 4, normalmente, normally. 5, mañana, tomorrow, and make sure you got that ño sound like onion, mañana. 6, la semana que viene, la semana que viene, next week. Literally we are saying the week that's coming, the coming week. 7, en el futuro, in the future. 8, el próximo lunes, next Monday. Próximo meaning the word next. 9, ayer, yesterday. 10, anoche, last night. 11, el año pasado, last year. Y finalmente, 12, el fin de semana pasado, last weekend. We're literally saying the weekend passed. Muy bien, continuamos. So as I said at the beginning, this lesson assumes you already have some knowledge of how to form the present, simple past and immediate future. A quick whirlwind tour for you. We're going to start off by recapping the present tense. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to take our infinitive verb to begin with. For example, hablar, to talk, comer, to eat. We remove the ending, whether it is an AR, ER, or an IR. We take them away. We're left with the stem, for example, hable, and then we need to use our grid to choose the correct letter. So if I wanted to say I talk, I'm going to use this row. That's our pronoun I. That's our AR verb. So I remove the AR and I add the O. Hablo, I talk. Okay, and that's your process for this whole tense. So I'm going to leave you to it to have a go at numbers 1 to 18. Venga, hasta luego. Y listos en 1, 2, 3. Okay, here are your answers. Before we go through them all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about pronunciation. I think we're okay with 1 to 6 in terms of hablo, como, giro, aprendo. You've got that nice rhythm and pattern of the pronunciation. The trickier ones are where you've got to add amos, hemos, imos to get the vowel sound correct. Amos, hemos, imos. So for example, pertenecemos, escribís, bebéis. Just takes a little bit of practice. Anyway, I'm going to leave you to have a look through those answers and see how you got on. Gracias. So that's how you conjugate regular verbs into the present tense. Of course, there are some pesky irregulars as well. I've made a note of 6 of them for you. We've got to be, ser, to have, tener, to go, ir, to do or to make, hacer, to want, querer, and to be able to is poder. We don't say to can in English, but I just wanted to put it there to make sure you know that that's actually how we would translate the conjugated verbs in English. I can, you can, and so on. So have a look through those. They do follow some patterns, and have a go at writing those 12 verbs in Spanish for me, using the grid to help. Gracias. Students often ask, how do you know if a verb is irregular? No easy answer to that one, I'm afraid. You just have to learn them. You have to practice them. You can find out if they're regular or irregular by looking it up in a dictionary or on the internet, but unfortunately it is just a case of practice, like it is with any language. Anyway, let's see how you've got on with those. Right, so we've looked at how to conjugate verbs in the present tense. Let's recap how to do this using the immediate future. Forming the immediate future in English is quite simple. You start with the verb to go and you conjugate it using what we call the continuous present. So I am going, you are going, she, he is going, we are going, all of you are going, they are going. You then add your infinitive verb. So I am going to eat, I am going to drink. And it is exactly the same principle in Spanish. It has 3 elements. You've got to have every element in place to form your immediate future. Otherwise, if you left out part 2, you haven't formed it correctly. So, your example, I am going to go. We're going to start with our conjugation of to go. So, voy, I am going. We're going to add a. And then our infinitive verb to go, ir. Voy a ir, I'm going to go. Have a look at 2 to 10 and see how you get on. Y listos en A, B, C. Okay, here are your answers. I just wanted to point out a couple things to you. Don't forget, you don't always have to use the pronoun. Spanish people will often not say yo voy a ir, I'm going to go. They just say voy a ir. How do you know what they're saying? Well, because voy is distinct from every other verb there. And be careful with your pronunciation of vais a tomar. All of you are going to take. Okay, come back to you shortly. Y finalmente, right, we're really bashing out these tenses today. We're going to have a quick look at the simple past, the preterite. So in English, we would often recognize the simple past by the fact that the verb ends in an ed. Improved, developed, turned, believed, learned, continued, and so on. We have a lot of irregulars in English, though, in the past tense, as you're going to find out. Anyway, it's exactly the same principle in terms of conjugation in Spanish. We remove the ending, er, ir, and we replace that ending with the correct letter or letter strings. Okay, step one, I want you to match up the Spanish verbs, infinitive verbs, to the English, and then use those to help you conjugate these verbs using the grid as well. Vamos a continuar en 3, 2, 1. Venga, okay. Llegar is to arrive. Salir, to go out. Creer, to believe. Continuar, to continue. Aprender, to learn. Mejorar, to improve. Desarrollar, to develop. Girar, to turn, which we saw last lesson. Okay, so those are your infinitive verbs. I'm going to leave these here for you to have a look through. Make sure you do have the accents in the right place, otherwise you haven't formed the tense correctly. And I wanted to point out this one, she developed. Desarrolló. If you didn't have that accent over the O, do you know what that would mean? Think about the present tense. So if you didn't have that accent there, it would mean I develop. It would be the present tense. So you can see now why accents are so important. Venga, vamos. It will come as no surprise to you that there are also irregular verbs we need to look at to form the past tense as well. Most of these are the same as you saw for the present, with the addition of leer, to read, which is quite irregular in the past in Spanish. So an example, ir, to go. So fui, I went. Fuiste, you went. Fue, he, she went. Fuimos, we went. Fuisteis, all of you went. And fueron, they went. Very strange, I know, in Spanish, that the verb ir, to go, and ser, to be, in the past tense at least, have exactly the same conjugation. So fui means I went, but it also could mean I was. Okay, so using these verbs in this grid, could you now write the equivalent in Spanish for me for numbers 1 to 18? All of them are up here, okay? Gracias, hasta luego. Y listos en A, B, y C. Okay, on this occasion, I'm not going to actually write out the answers for you. I'm going to read them, and you're going to need to listen really carefully to the pronunciation and check in the grid, okay? I went, fui. I was, fui, exactly the same. I read, leí, with the accent over the I. I had, tuve, and don't forget that V. I made, hice, and the first sound is that CE. I did, it's exactly the same, hice. You had, tuviste. You went, fuiste. You were, fuiste, exactly the same. You made, hiciste, and you're probably recognizing the iste pattern is still there, even though these are irregular verbs. He went, fue. Some people confuse the pronunciation of fui, e. Remember that I is an E sound, and fue, e. She was, exactly the same, fue. She went, fue. Oh my goodness, all of those things mean fue. You could distinguish between them by using el or ella, of course, for your pronouns. He was, fue. So that's 4 times now we've had fue. We read, leímos, don't forget that accent. We went, fuimos. You all had, tuvisteis, quite a tricky one to pronounce. Tuvisteis, hicisteis, leísteis, fuisteis, okay? And finally, they made, hicieron. Muy bien. Over to you. Within each of these 3 sentences, label for me the present, past and future tenses. Up to you how you do it. You could use color coding, you could just label, and then could you translate the sentences into English. So this is the first time we're seeing 3 tenses in the same short paragraph or sentence. Venga, vamos. Okay, number 1, I have color coded the present tense in red. Aprendo, I learn. The past tense here is tuve and fue, and the future, voy a tener. Normally, I learn Italian on Monday, but yesterday I didn't have class because the teacher was absent. I'm going to have class this coming week or next week. Dos. Our present is prefiero and es, I prefer, it is. Our past, fui, I went, and our future, voy a volver, I'm going to return. I think it's always quite easy to recognise the future, isn't it? Because you've got the three parts. So, I went to the park on foot. I suppose you could say I walked to the park yesterday, but I prefer going by bike because it's more fun. This weekend, I'm going to return, but with my bike. Y tres, present tense, I've got encuentro. You might not know the word encuentro. That doesn't matter. You should recognise it because of the ending. It means I find. Past tense, we've got two. We've got fui for I went and era was. That's an imperfect tense, which we haven't seen yet, but I thought I should just point out it is a past. And your future, vamos a ir. We are going to go to a theme park this weekend because I find it exciting. I wouldn't translate that as emotional, okay? The last time that I went was in August. Venga, vamos a escuchar. Time for a listening activity. I want you to listen to the script being read out to you, the three separate ones. And for each one, can you make a note of the tense or tenses you hear? How do you know that they are those tenses? So, for example, it could be the verb ending, it could be a signpost, and this is more challenging. What do they mean? So I'm going to read them just once each, and if you feel you need to go back over them, no problem. Just pause, rewind, listen again as much as you need, okay? Venga, número uno. El octubre pasado fui a España con mi familia. Dos. Normalmente voy al parque para jugar al fútbol, pero este fin de semana voy a jugar en el polideportivo. 3. Ayer fui a la piscina y fue emocionante. Ahora salgo con mis amigos. Mañana voy a visitar un museo de historia con mi madre y mi padre. Right, let's see how you got on with that. So, number one, the tense we used was the past. How do you know? Well, I said el octubre pasado, last October. Fui, I went. The meaning, last October I went to Spain with my family. Número dos, number two, we had the present and future tenses mentioned. We would recognise them because first of all you heard the signpost normalmente, normally, voy, I go, and then este fin de semana, this weekend, which denotes the future is going to come up, voy a jugar, three parts. The meaning, normally I go to the park to play football, but this weekend I'm going to play in the sports centre. Polideportivo was the word for sports centre. Número tres, number three, all three tenses were mentioned. Signposts such as ayer, yesterday, ahora, now, mañana, tomorrow. We had tenses such as fui, I went, fue, it was, salgo, ending in the O, I go out. Voy a visitar, our three-parter, I'm going to visit, denoting the future. Yesterday I went to the pool, it was exciting. Now I'm going out with friends, salgo, I go out. Tomorrow I'm going to visit a history museum with my mum and my dad. Y finalmente, vamos a practicar un poquito más. We always finish off lessons, don't we, with a little recap over some of our vocabs. So, I want you to identify for me on the board any future tense. There's only one. Voy a visitar. I'm going to visit. Could you identify for me any present tense? Okay, we've got hablo. You might have also recognized hablamos. I talk, we talk. And finally, yes, I know we've only got past tense left, but which one means I spoke or I talked? Hablé, recognizable because of the accent. What about I went or I was? Fui. We went or we were. Obviously. fuimos. I've left this one here actually because hablamos, you might have noticed, it means we talk, but it's also the same conjugation for the past. Hablamos can mean we talked or we spoke, and you would know which tense is being used because of the context, because of the signposts. Okay? Muy bien.
Muy bien todo el mundo. Completado, terminado, hecho.
And next lesson is going to be a not very scary assessment, which is going to cover everything we've looked at over the last 23 lessons, from the basic greetings, describing yourself, to where you lived, all the way up to food, drink, and exploring Spain, directions, a little bit of tense work as well. Okay, so join me next time for that. Until then, take care. Hasta luego.